All right, so let's start with part 2 of this big discussion. Last time we were talking about estate planning. Now we're going to jump into beneficiaries. This came with a conversation that we had specifically regarding, clients that had bad situation. Yeah. And so let's just jump right in because we got a lot. We're gonna we talk about estate planning. After this, we're gonna talk about accountability and follow through. Then we're talking about fulfillment and purpose. Then what we're really good at, we're gonna start talking about lifestyle, income, and retirement planning. So that's our sweet spot, and all this other stuff is really important too.
Yep.
So beneficiary, what are the different types of beneficiaries that are out there?
So you
primary contingent. You go ahead. Nope.
Oh,
now,
fight. Paper, rock, scissors. Paper, rock, scissors.
Yeah.
So you have your primary, which is going to be the first person that you want your money or whatever to go to, your assets to go to. And then you have contingency. So that is exactly what it is. Who's the backup in case that first person isn't able to accept those
So you
assets?
just jumped right into my next question was really what's the difference? But so there's two major categories, but there is a third that nobody really talks about, which is the tertiary. So there could be 3 levels down on these beneficiaries. And one other thing I want to talk about that we actually didn't put in our notes is the different types of primary or contingent beneficiaries that you can have.
Yeah, it's the one I never pronounced right? The
Per stirpes?
Per stirpes or
Per capita.
per capita. Yeah.
I know we all talked about this before, but per stirpes is bloodline. So if, let's just say you have a beneficiary on your statement and it's your son or daughter and their spouse, and your son or spouse passes away and they're the primary on your account and it's per stirpes, that means the in-law gets nothing. And then let's just say the contingent would be your grandkids. He would get jumped or she would get jumped. It would go right to the kids. Now, he would kind of control some of that, and it would be open to interpretation. There would be legal battles and stuff like that.
But on age, right?
But on age until they were an adult.
Yep.
And then once they were an adult, then, it's their money, and no longer can that spouse take care of that. There's lots of situations I've run into in my career where that becomes very important. It's not just, hey, I want this to go to my son or my daughter or my kids or whatever. It's, hey, that creep that's in our family or her, we don't want them to have anything. So what can we do? And then that's where this per stirpes or per capita. You can have the other side of the coin, which I'd like to say my in-laws would think about me, which would be the per capita. So which would mean, that's a whole nother thing.
All separate.
In that line of thinking, everybody's equal. So if you are listed as a beneficiary, or you and your spouse and somebody else, everybody gets equal amount. So if there's 4 people on there, everybody gets 25% because per capita basically says divide it out evenly. So there's not a whole lot of things to discuss there.
Yeah, a lot of times if it's parents leaving it for kids, it's whether that percentage is divided again. If you have 3 kids, the 2 are left. Does it go to the one who passed kids, or does it get divided 50-50 amongst them?
Well, and the per stirpes follows the blood, where the per capita doesn't. But the issue with the per capita, which is very interesting, let's just say my wife was listed and there wasn't, like, if you don't initiate its per capita per stirpes and a beneficiary has passed away, it's like they don't exist. If a per stirpes or per capita is included, then it follows their amount of money will go to their heir. So if it's per stirpes, whatever that amount of money was, say it was $100,000, and that person's passed away, it follows their bloodline down.
So the next living...
The next in that bloodline,
Yep.
If it's per capita, and it's a daughter or son, and they pass, it would go right to the surviving spouse or whoever. It doesn't have to be blood, it's whoever is connected them legally.
I actually have a client who's going through this.
Oh, really?
He and his brother are getting money from an aunt because of how she wrote her will. It was a per stirpes, and it's funneling because they unfortunately have lost both their parents. So the 2 brothers are going to get what was going to go to...
Because of father bloodline.
Yep.
There you have it. There you have it.
Really?
All right, so let's talk about when to update beneficiaries. This is...
All the times when you don't think about it. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's so funny you bring that up because I actually have a note, and I think I talked about this last podcast, that I have to review all of my own beneficiaries because this came up, and I'm like, wait, I don't have any beneficiaries on one of our larger check or savings accounts. And I'm like, I never even thought about it. Maybe I did, and I'm better than I think, and there is something on there. But I have a note, which I still haven't done anything with. So when are the times that we need to update? That we don't.
And I make a joke, but it's all the times that you are so involved in that life change, right? So divorce, marriage, having a baby, if somebody passes, if you have so much on your mind that you don't have time to think about it, that's when you need to think about it and change it. And I make a joke because it seems like that's when people forget. But yeah, no, on a serious note, it's when you have those major life events where marriage, you obviously want to leave it to a spouse when you would have left it to, if you had kids, or to your sibling otherwise. And if you don't change it and you forget about it because you're going through that marriage and then something, God forbid, happens to you, they don't assume, and it doesn't have logic. It's what you left. And it has happened, to your point. I mean, it does happen.
Well, the crazy thing is, I have a client, and I'm not going to say their name, but they're going to know exactly who they are. They hear the story, because I've told this story so many times. I was doing continuing ed classes for a college in Fort Mill, I think. No, it wasn't Fort Mill. But I had mentioned about beneficiaries in this one aspect of this course. And I said, does anybody in this room know exactly who their beneficiaries are? And I had, typically you always have that one, and you know who you are. and this one particular class, this one guy raised his hand, and he was like, I know exactly who my beneficiaries are in all of my accounts. I was like, that's awesome. I said, just do me a favor, do all of us a favor. And when you go home, review them. And in the next class, when we're back, we can just say, you're the rock star. You get the gold star for the day, right? And he's like, done, And sure enough, a week comes back later, and I do this in every class, so I wasn't even thinking, about it. And I'm waiting outside of the classroom. And the funny thing is, I just moved to Charlotte at the time. I think I was here maybe 2.5 months, so I didn't really understand the culture just yet. And standing out there waiting for everybody to come in, hi, shaking hands, kissing babies, so to speak, right? And this one lady starts walking in the door. It's a long hallway, and she's walking down. She has a head of steam with her, and I can see the husband kind of trailing behind. And then she comes right up to me and gives me a hug. And I'm like, man, they're real warm in the South. I didn't know what to do.
Only met you one day.
I'm not much of a hugger, And then by the time she's finished hugging me, and I think she said something, I really want to thank you. And I'm thinking, what?
I know I teach.
I know the class is pretty good, awesome, but this is a little overkill, And then sure enough, her husband comes, and as soon as he gets behind her, she kind of leans to the side, and she's like, tell him. And she smacks him on the arm, like kind of like left hookish.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, tell me what? And then she's like, tell him. And then he's like, remember when I raised my hand in the last class? And I was like, I knew everything about my beneficiaries. He goes, we've been married such a long time, I never thought that she wasn't a beneficiary. But when I got hired at the company I've been working at my entire career, I never thought about the beneficiaries again. I just assumed, it was always that way because they've been married for, at that time, I don't know how many years, the time we had the conversation was 20 or 30 years. And he'd been working at the same company that whole time, and his mom and dad were beneficiaries. And he never even thought to your point.
Right.
You don't
think about it, yeah.
And then here they are, their entire marriage. She wasn't the beneficiary on their largest single asset, that they had invested, and which is now fixed. They are much happier. Nice. But to the point of this, like there needs to be some kind of checks and balances because you don't think about it when you need to think about it. When something happens in your life, for me, I moved from South Carolina to North Carolina. We lived in South Carolina. We're building a house in North Carolina. We rented a house. We just moved over. And then we had a conversation about this. And I'm like, shoot, I never updated my will. Did I look at beneficiaries on my accounts?
Yep.
And I'm like, why? And this is that whole leaky pipes from a plumber scenario. And I'm not an estate.
The cobbler's kids never have shoes.
Yeah. So you don't think, we do this for a living for clients, and sometimes you forget your own stuff. And I'm happy to say I'm not going to do that. And I have all the documents that I need to put together, but I haven't updated them since I crossed state lines. So one of the best practices that I think would be really, really smart to implement would be to review your estate documents, your beneficiaries every few years. That can be 1 year, it can be 3 years. You know, and we actually in our office have a beneficiary like document that we've put together for clients. You can request it. It's just have a peek at it. And it's not something that you need to look at all the time, but it is something you should glance at.
You don't set and forget.
You don't, not with beneficiaries.
And you have to put it on your calendar. People are like, oh, I'll get to it in a year and a half. And you're not going to think about it.
No.
This is not one of those things. You do this along with, and I always joke, changing the air filters at home. You don't think of it. You got to do it. But you never think of it. Do the old school, set yourself a calendar, invite. I have a joke with a few of my clients that I have to remind them, like they're my children and I love them, but they're, oh, thank you so much. Or you start a new job, and you might be in the same boat. I have a handful of young clients that I ask them the beneficiary question when they're setting up a new account. And frankly, a lot of them are very ahead of their time. They have no idea. I'm like, well, get back to, well, can we just set up the account and I'll add it later? I'm like, absolutely not. You're not going to add it later. You need to go home and do that math. We'll open this account up. We'll be here. Like, and they don't even know yet. They haven't even had the tough conversation. Am I leaving it to my siblings? Am I leaving it to my parents? If my parent, they haven't even thought through it, right? And then those are the people, back to your example, who we know who that is and we love them. You get a job, especially these, you know, the younger couples, they get a job and they're not quite married. Back to your point is you have to remember that when you do get married, you've got to go back. And then vice versa is also true. You get a new job, don't assume it carries over. Make sure you're setting it.
And if you're not one of those people that live by their calendar, use people like us and say, hey, I just need you to remind me once a year, you know, to review all these things, you know, estate docs, beneficiaries, whatever. It's a good practice to have. I'm the type of person that I'll set it on my calendar and then I'll just go into it, duplicate, change the year, duplicate, change the year, and I'll put 5 years out, you know, and make sure they're always on my calendar, or just say, remind me every year. And now I've set and forget it, and it'll always pop up on my calendar as long as I use the same calendar.
Right.
And which I have been using for probably 15 years. It's just a really, really important practice that I can assure you that I've already instituted or instituting it now on my own to review all of these things. Because it's important. You get older, you're worth more. You know, everybody that's typically watching this, you know, you've got a lot of assets.
And you're
so this
growing
type of
every
stuff
day.
is super important.
Yeah,
So
one that you may not think of that I actually just uncovered this morning with a client. Their company, they've been there for 20 years, but the company changed 401k providers. They went from one company to another company, and everything, they never had to do anything. We logged in and looked.
No benefit.
There were 0 beneficiaries. It just completely cleared them out. That part didn't roll over. So just be careful and make sure that, you know, even if there's system changes within your company.
That's why it's so important to review these every year.
Yeah.
That's something you would never think of. You're
No.
like, oh, well, they just talk to each other. We're good. We live in a digital age. I'm taken care of. Yep, nope.
All my accounts came over, the same investment, like same style of investing.
I actually
moved
had
over.
a situation back in Michigan where I had a client, same type of situation. They had filled out their forms, their applications, put their beneficiaries in it. But whoever put the application through into their system did not add the beneficiaries, and they wouldn't honor them. And they had a signed document, but they said there was something weird that it had to be in play on their digital platform, and they had nothing on it. It said there was no beneficiaries added, even though they had the actual document, and it actually had to go to court.
Jeez.
Because they would not push out the beneficiaries. And the ladies, we were sending them. We went all the way up.
My account.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we don't use those documents anymore. They're not legal anymore. And they're like, this is our new system. They never filled anything out. And we're like, it's the same. Your logo is on the statement.
Right.
So that's why it's just a really, as soon as you logged into their account, it showed their main dashboard. It had beneficiaries, nothing listed, but nobody paid attention to it because everybody was like, we filled that out in the
Yeah, we did
paperwork.
that, right?
Sure enough, it really mattered.
Oh, yeah.
I was also going to say, don't forget life insurance. We're doing a lot of retirement conversations, and we mentioned banks. Don't go forgetting life insurance policies either. Make sure that if
Every account you have.
every account, but oftentimes you think of life insurance as a separate type thing.
Well, and actually that's what we're going to talk about. So common mistakes on beneficiary designations. So one of the things is like failing to name contingent beneficiaries is really, really important. Most people are like, oh, I just put my kids.
Right.
And they don't think past that. That's where that per stirpes, per capita designation comes in. That's super important.
And also think, I mean, and I hate to say it, but you lose somebody in a car accident and you lose more than one person a lot of times. And that person might have been your beneficiary. So don't forget, sad as it might sound, don't forget that multiple people could be involved in the same incident, and you need that contingent plan.
Absolutely.
So
it's such a morbid conversation.
I know. I was going to say,
beneficiaries. It's like, what happens to my money when I die?
You're saying that, I feel like I'm getting ready to get choked up, and nothing's happened. You know, we're just having a
you
conversation.
said it, and it just it resonates, and it makes you think of it. But yeah, things that you don't think about, and it's not supposed to happen that soon.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of us don't get to you don't get to plan your death, right? So it's not like you can be like, oh, I can do all this right before I die. It's like, no,
do it
life
now.
can
And you
change
think you have plenty
right
of time. It's one of those things, oh, I can do it later. And you know.
Yeah.
So on the beneficiaries, it's any type of financial account that you have. So, obviously the big one we're talking about is 401ks and IRAs and things like that. It could be a pension plan. I mean, it could be stock grants. I mean, we were on the phone this morning moving over a 401k or trying to move over a 401k. And at the same time, they got confused. We're called about a 401k, but they had stock grants. They have their own set of documents. So you could actually call the company that holds them both and say, let me see my beneficiaries on my 401k, and you could have XYZ listed. Go to your RSUs or whatever the stock grants or whatever the stock sale purchases through your company. It's a whole nother set of documents and who gets what. Right. So you can call the same company and actually have to verify a beneficiaries like 6 times, depending on how many different accounts you have. So if you have 4 accounts at one company, you need to verify all 4. You can't just say, what are my beneficiaries, and expect it to be listed under all of them. It doesn't work that way. Yep. Most of the time, the accounts are like, well, you have 1 account, your wife has 2 accounts, you have 2 joint accounts. Like, you don't have the authority, probably, to ask on your wife's account without her on the phone. So it's a tedious, obnoxious, long process, but you could, with help of somebody like us, we can get it done, in 10 minutes.
Ask certain questions,
figure it out real fast.
And you mentioned the different accounts, but also think through if you have somebody, maybe your daughter, getting married, and her name changes.
Yep.
Make sure you update it for that reason as well, even though it might be the same person. If for whatever marriage, or I've seen it go the other way too, you undo a marriage. If name changes, make sure you're updating it in your.
And unfortunately, on these beneficiary forms, they don't ask for a social security number, which most people don't want to give that number out anyways. But then your last name becomes really important. Yep. And now you're like, well, that was who I was before I was married, and now you got to jump through whatever.
And you don't want to hope that everybody
marriage
works with
certificates.
That's a pain in the keister.
The other one that I learned was your daily bank accounts can sometimes have, or they do have beneficiaries to it. So like your checking account, your savings account. You enlightened me to that. I didn't realize that my checking account has a beneficiary
the hard
to it.
part about that, and that's what we're going to talk about next. I want to talk about non-qualified investment accounts and that. So on the bank account side, so you have checking, savings, whatever. Your kids could have accounts. However that all works. Banks don't typically call them beneficiaries. So if you walk into a bank and you're like, hey, I want to put beneficiaries on my checking account, they're going to look at you like cross-eyed, like, you can't do that. I actually had clients tell me that they walked into a bank, said that, I want to add a beneficiary to my checking account. The bank says, we can't allow that because they're not called beneficiaries. It's a transfer on death.
Right.
It's a payable on death. So bank terminology, gets in the way. So they can add beneficiaries, but they call it something different. So say, well, if you don't allow beneficiaries, what can I add to my account that can direct these monies to somebody else? They go, oh, that's simple. We just do this.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I didn't know the secret language.
Yeah.
And you
Stop
said
acting like a banker.
we were on a call this morning together, and so true that 2 different departments might not know what the other department does. And you may need
How
to
many
make...
times did we get transferred?
Oh my God,
6?
it was 6.
Oh my goodness.
Six
Unbelievable.
times.
And I won't use the
We
company
called
name, but that was
for
a really...
one thing.
Right.
I won't say Fidel. I mean, wait, what?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it was
I don't
1-800
normally have
no
that
help.
trouble.
Normally it's not that
I mean,
bad, but
6
today
times.
was horrible.
Wow.
Anyway, but they were all good at what they were good at, but they had no idea what the other second part of our question was. We had to go to another department. So when you go to
And
a
then
bank,
they keep transferring us. It was unbelievable.
And you go to-
35 minutes.
and I didn't mean to
turn
go down
something
that
off.
road other than the bank doesn't know the same things that when you call your 401k company and their terminology or what they were trained on. So you've got to help them get to that.
So the POD transfer on death or
TOD.
so payable on death or
payable on
TOD
death, sorry.
transfer on death. There's two, or they
There
might
are.
call it something else. I mean, at the end of the day, they might have a new thing that they call it, which we don't even know. Those are two of the typical ones. That's where you can explain yourself. I just want to make sure that my money can go to somebody without a judge intervening, similar to a beneficiary. What's it called? Right. And they'll all have the ability. You just might need to figure out their secret code, to get it done.
And always get confirmation.
Yeah.
Make sure, back to your point.
I would go online.
Right. Go back and make sure that it cycled
You
through what
see
it
it.
needed. It got approved where it needed. Because you brought up that example and it reminded me of one that I had. Don't assume that it went through a computer system. Go back and check that it was saved.
That's right. And another thing that you want to talk about, or we want to talk about, is the qualified accounts. So this is like a brokerage account, a cash account that's not with a bank. It might be a financial institution like a Fidelity or Schwab or something like that, where you might have, 50, 100, whatever amount of money inside of an investment account that you're buying stocks. What happens to that account? So typically you can say beneficiaries on those, but it's the same type of thing where it's a POD or a TOD, where you have beneficiaries on it. It follows the same process, but the terminology is a little bit different. I don't know why everybody just can't adopt beneficiaries. They have to call it something different. But if it's government money, where it's like qualified basically means the government is going to get a fair share, their fair share, then it's a beneficiary. If it's a non-qualified, like checking, savings, cash, brokerage, it's not called beneficiaries. Right. What? It's the same. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why they do this. It's a pain. The more we talk about this, the more I just think you need to call your advisor, and say, hey, hold me accountable to this. That's why we're going to talk about accountability next. Right. Because this is all important. Like getting this stuff done is vital. You might not care. I might not care because I pass away. I ain't thinking anymore.
Duke it out. You can fight over it.
I'm going to be walking the crystal sea with Jesus, know? But everybody back here is going to be left picking up the pieces going, why didn't Dad, all he had to do was fill out this form.
Yes.
Sign something. Why? He was an advisor. He was the worst advisor out there.
Right.
So busy helping everybody else.
Yeah. Helping
what
everybody.
about me?
What about me? Yeah. That's not the legacy I want to leave. So it is important for you, for us, for all of us to take care of these sorts of things. Unfortunately, it's a pain. Take advantage of the resources you have. If you have a trusted advisor, that you work with, use them. We're going to get all kinds of calls after this.
I know.
And that's great. And then the last thing is just making sure that I just want to reiterate this, that you have something on your calendar, because life comes at us faster than we can handle. And making sure that you have a time on your calendar every single year that you can review these types of things or send an email or an email gets sent to you. Right. I think we're gonna create something that we're gonna automate for our clients that can do this review for them. This is just too important to not have something that holds our clients accountable to making sure they update them, because we can't. We can just tell you what it is. Right. You actually have to have the authority. You have to give the authority to make changes.
And it's the easiest thing, and it's so important.
Yeah.
So
super important. Any last thoughts?
Hopefully by us reminding you of the accounts that we can see, it reminds you to look at the ones
triggers
that
the other things
you hold at other institutions.
Yeah.
As well. Just a good.
Well, that's another point. Is we don't a lot of times we don't hold all the money.
Right.
Right.
So we can't.
Yeah, we're not going to have your checking and savings account.
Yeah. Good, valid point.
Yeah.
Any other last thoughts?
No.
No.
All right. So this is segment 2 of however many segments we're going to do in this. Next time we're going to talk about accountability and follow through. So a lot of what we're talking about on the document side, estate planning or beneficiaries, sometimes you just need to be held accountable, either to yourself or by somebody else, to make sure that you follow through and get things done. So we're actually going to talk through a whole show specifically about that, because And it's bigger than just beneficiaries and estate planning.
Sure.
You know, there's accountability on all kinds of things that we're going to discuss.
Action.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of things that need to be taken place
Yep.
and being held accountable for all of us.
A little tough love, we call it.
That's right. So, thanks. Hope you learned something. And like always, if you have any questions or concerns or want to get help on anything we've discussed, just reach out to us or your financial advisor.